I am bored. I'm really bored. Let me make sure that my audio is coming through. My audio is coming through. And nobody can see my face. Let me just kind of... let me kind of just elbow my cat out of the way. I don't know why he feels like he needs to be where I'm at. Well, screw this. Let me get a... I haven't done a podcast in a long time. Are we good? We are good. Let's see. I feel like doing just, stuff. And you can see the top. What are you doing, cat? It is not sleepy times on my stuff. I should take this. I gotta switch over all my audio. So you guys don't have to where's this? This will go like that. This will go like that. That. And move everything over. Let me go. Yeah. Stay back, cat. Let's go with the USB. That'll work. Alright. Let's double check desktop audio. I didn't even try double check it. I know I should double check this. Go to properties, audio monitoring, whatever. Device default. That'll work. That'll work just fine. Let me try something. A test. The old.
Areas on this map.
There we go.
The United States is the global superpower. The greater Midwest system is the largest and most productive agricultural zone on the planet. Outproduces the next two zones put together.
Test.
That's really a side note. It's the blue lines that crisscross that system, the greater Mississippi system. This is 13,000 miles of navigable waterway. Why is that important? Well, those of you who are in the oil business know moving things from A to B is a bit of a bitch. But if you float it, it's 1/13 the cost. And that assumes that the road, the rail, the pipe infrastructure is already in place. If you don't have that,
that's 6 years old.
One advantage. In the highlands, it's 100-to-1 advantage. The United States, in just that one system, has more miles of navigable waterway than the rest of the planet put together. In addition, there are forests and lakes to the north, there are deserts and mountains to the south, there are oceans on either side. The United States is the most secure piece of physical geography on the planet. So it's rich, it's safe, it's secure. We can't mess this up. We've tried. So even in the worst case scenario, where somehow there's a third Obama term, and halfway through there's a crochet disaster and Donald Trump ends up taking over. And then we spend the next 32 years bouncing back and forth between the Clinton and the Bush dynasties. You're gonna be fine. Okay, so let's talk about how we Americans... Oh, pose. Let's talk about how we Americans see the world. And what we think here as ancient history, the world was imperial. You had the French Navy protecting French trade between the French mainland and the French colonies. The Brits did the same, the Japanese the same, and so on. It was a sequestered imperial economic network. You didn't trade with the country next to you because you never knew when some idiot whose language you didn't understand was going to throw a war and you'd lose access to whatever raw material or market or trade route you thought was so important. So you kept it in-house. You competed with all of these other imperial systems. Those competitions led to wars. Those wars culminated in World War II. And at the end of that war, the only country that had a navy and an economy left was the United States, and the US changed the rules of the game. Now, instead of everybody having their own separate system, we were going to merge all participants into one global whole. The US would patrol the sea lanes for absolutely everybody, and everyone could also export goods to the United States more or less duty-free, and export their way back to affluence. There were a couple of catches. The biggest one is you had to allow the Americans to fight the Cold War their way. You heard that right. We bribed up an alliance to contain and ultimately crush the Soviets. And it worked really well. Global GDP expanded by a factor of 10, the global population tripled, and we saw the Soviets fall further and further behind with every passing year. We'd expand the network, first to Western Europe, then to the defeated Axis, ultimately even to the Chinese Communist Party. How did we enforce it? Not all that complicated. The carrier on the right, that's a traditional jump carrier. There's 10 of those on the planet. The one on the left is a supercarrier. There's 10 of those on the planet. Not one of the jump carriers is American. Every single one of the supercarriers is American. And we're in the process of retiring all of them to replace them with bigger carriers. The United States has enjoyed a 10-to-1 ratio in naval force projection advantage versus the combined navies of the rest of the planet since 1944. And the reason that free trade works, the reason that the Bretton Woods system has lasted so long, is the United States has chosen to put that differential at the service of the global commons. Without American engagement, without the American Navy doing what it does well, there would not be a global free trade regime. But what most people miss is that for the United States, global trade has never been about trade. It's not even about economics. It's about security. As a percentage of GDP, the United States is the least involved economy in the world. Only 7% of our total economic strength comes from exports now, and half of that's NAFTA. So you can have the United States step back from the global system, step back from supporting a global structure that was designed for a war that ended 25 years ago, and we'll have a recession that's roughly on par with what we went through in 1990 for a year. And then we're back to normal. But for the rest of the world, for countries like China to get 40% of GDP from trade, or Germany where it's 50, that's the end. So never forget that the global system is one American bad hair day away from a breakdown. That's piece one. Let's talk piece two. This is demography. Now what you have here is a demographic pyramid. Children on the bottom, retirees on the top. It's a pyramid simply because of mortality. Now you can split any demographic grouping into three big pieces. The first one are your young adults, people who are roughly aged 20 to 45. These are the folks that are just starting out, and it's all about consumption. They're buying houses, they're buying cars, they're raising kids, they're smoking pot. It's spend, 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 spend. But they're at the early end of their earning potential. So all of this consumption requires borrowing, car loans, house loans. Next, you've got your mature workers, people roughly aged 40 to 65. These folks are sending the kids off, the house is paid off, they're saving for retirement. Just as the younger group generates most of the economic growth from their consumption, this age bracket generates most of the investment in the system and most of the tax dollars. So 70% of consumption from the younger cohort, 70% of tax dollars and investment from the older cohort. And then you've got your mature workers who step back from the system, shift their savings from stocks and bonds into T-bills and cash because they can't take the volatility, and basically become dormant from an economic point of view. This is how it normally is. This is a strict capital model. You got a small generation providing capital to a large generation. So certain patterns emerge. If you want to borrow, you have to, for a business, you have to have a business plan. If you want to get a car loan, your car is the collateral. Really crazy concepts. Do we have any Canadians here today? I love Canadians. Hands up. Come on. All right. Hey! What the hell is wrong with you people? Because apparently in 1974, you forgot how to have kids. Uh-huh. Now, what we've got here is an inverted demography.
I wasn't old enough then.
In the late 50s, early 60s cohort that are saving for retirement. Canada right now, as a result, is capital rich. This is a population that is saving everything they can, and so the Canadian system has a fairly robust social welfare network because they can afford it. In addition, there's been enough extra capital in the last 15 years to fund the development of the Athabasca tar sands area. That couldn't have happened in any other part of the world at any other time in history. Only in Canada, only right now. But in 7 years, when this big bulge moves into mass retirement, that money will stop flowing. In fact, it'll reverse flow. Because instead of having all these taxpayers, those former taxpayers will now be drawing pensions and drawing health care benefits. And Canada will go from the most capital rich it's ever been to the most capital poor it's ever been. You'll also notice that there's no replacement generation. There isn't a generation doing the consuming in Canada. We haven't had consumption-led growth in Canada in almost 15 years. And it's not going to come back within the next 40. Here's the United States. Now, where
chimney.
are my baby boomers? People born 1946 to 1965. Come on, hands up, hands up. Oh, wow. The rest of you guys must be sleeping in. Baby boomers are usually the majority of my audience. They're usually like a freaking Roman legion facing me down. The boomers are the largest generation we've ever had as a percentage of the population. And as such, there's certain patterns that have emerged. When they entered the workforce all those years ago, we discovered that one of the problems of the boomer generation was that there's too damn many of them. And so they took all the jobs that were available, and then they took jobs that were below their skill set because there just weren't enough. Now that they're moving towards retirement, exactly the same thing is happening on the investment side.
This shit is happening now.
Swallowed up every investment opportunity that was available in the United States and North America, and now their money is squeezing out, searching for that last little bit of yield before they retire. So there are a lot of decisions in boomer investments that are perhaps not all that wise. So Enron, the boomer's fault. Subprime, the boomer's fault. The brick boom, possible because of the boomers. Where are my Gen Yers? People born 1980 to 1999. You know, it's a little early for you guys, but, you know. Oh, hey! Thanks for showing. It's hard to get them in the room before 4 o'clock. Now, Gen Y are the second largest demography we've ever had in the United States. They're the boomers' kids. And they face exactly the same wage pressures that the boomers did when they entered the workforce. There's too many of them. They have a couple of advantages that the boomers lack, though. First of all, they're the most technically savvy and well-educated generation we've ever had. So as we move into this Uber and Lyft economy of part-time work and many career changes, they're actually fairly well prepared for that socially, educationally, technically. Second, 1/3 of them still live at home. And of the remainder, half were only able to move out because their parents are paying for their rent. So we are actually in the midst of the greatest generational wealth transfer in American history right now without anyone having died yet. Which is a disaster for this last group. Where are my Xers? 1966 to 1979. Has anybody seen Marcy? I see everybody but Marcy. We're the smallest group ever. And we're sandwiched in the middle. I mean, when was the last time you picked up a newspaper and actually read about the Xers? It's all the boomers all the time, all the Ys. We entered the workforce to discover there were no jobs because the boomers had taken them all. And so we were the perpetual intern generation, and they wonder why we're always so bitter. And it gets worse. Now that the boomers are nearing mass retirement, the boomers have voted for themselves a quite generous package of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits that will never be undone because Xers will not outnumber the boomers until the Xers are in their 70s. So we're not going to win that fight. And even if it did come up for a vote, you could always count on Gen Y to vote with their parents to prevent reform, because that means that the boomers would have to move in with Gen Y, and from Gen Y's point of view, that's strictly a one-way relationship. So we are looking at a marginal tax increase for the Xers of probably about 50%, just to pay for what the boomers have said that they're going to have. No fun. However, as much as I like to dog on Gen Y, and they do deserve it, thank God they're there for 2 reasons. First of all, you notice that there's kind of a bulge in the bottom there. Unlike Canada, the United States currently does have consumption-led growth because of Gen Y's consumption. They're in that magic zone right now. And in 15 years, when Gen Y matures, and I use that word in its loosest possible way, they will fill out the ranks of the tax-paying class in a way that Gen X never could. Right now, we've got a large generation paying for a small generation. Credit costs are low. In a few years, as the boomers retire, that will flip, and we'll have a small generation paying for a large one. It'll suck. But by the time we get to 2030, it flips again. And Gen Y will be our salvation. And what's worse, they're special. Because here's the developed world in 2030 without the United States.
That's fucking
Everybody
crazy.
has the Canada disease. And so by the time we get to 2030, we will have segued from a world where the United States is the largest financial power and largest consuming power, and one in which the United States is the only financial power and only consuming power. And it's only 15 years away. So we got 15 years where it's going to kind of...
It's only 8 years away. It's only 8 years away.
Quick around the world. Top left, that's South Africa. Walk up that pyramid with me. Primary school, high school, college, 50% chance of catching HIV and dying within 5 years. South Africa as a modern economy is already dead. They can't train up skilled labor faster than it's dying off. Top right, that's the Russian Federation. You had a 60% drop in the Russian birth rate at the end of the Cold War.
Look at that.
Envelope math tells us that within the next 5 years, everyone in the Red Army will have been born during the baby bust, which means that the Red Army's in the process of shrinking by half in just the next 5 years. So if the Russians are going to use military tactics to try to change how their world works, they have to do it now.
There you go.
Bottom left, People's Republic of China. 25 years after the one-child policy, they are running out of 25-year-olds. They tell me that the Chinese are great at math. I'm not seeing it. It's actually worse than that, because you'll notice there's kind of a blue fringe on the right side of that graphic, right? That's the surplus male population. When you have a patriarchal society, like the Chinese, and you tell people they can only have one child, female infanticide is very common. So there's a 10 to 15% sex imbalance between men and women across most of the provinces of China. That's actually a lot worse than it sounds. Because of the baby bust, the purposeful, engineered baby busts, labor costs in China have expanded by a factor of 9 in the last 15 years. Mexican labor is now half the cost and more highly skilled than Chinese labor. We're seeing the reshoring patterns to support that. And if you were working in a place like Beijing or Hong Kong, and you're a manufacturer, and you've realized that you're running out of labor, literally, you went inland to find new workers to recruit them to come back to the coast with you. But you only brought back the women. Why? You can put 6 chicks in a 300 square foot apartment. You do that with 6 dudes, you will have a severed head in the fridge by the end of the month. Men and women of childbearing age in China are not just separated by socioeconomic status, they are separated by physical province. Now, you may have heard that the Chinese did away with one-child policy last Wednesday. Let's assume for the moment that every Chinese citizen went out and did their patriotic duty that night. Riddle me this. How long does it take to grow a 30-year-old? 30 years and 9 months. So that might improve in a generation, but not before. And then finally, there's New Zealand. That structure look familiar? New Zealand is the only country in the world with a demography similar to the United States. So we've got about a decade to figure out how to fix our healthcare system, because after that we will be waking up with a hangover every morning, because that's just what it means when you rock it with the Kiwis. So that's 2. Demography here, a little wonky, but actually pretty good. So, and then finally, we've got shale. This is what I like to call the checkbook map. Every dot is someone with a checkbook, because they can afford to pay the power bill. 3 population centers I want to draw your attention to. Up north, the happening town of Bismarck, North Dakota. In the middle, the rockin' city of Midland, Texas. And down south, the stone-cold, boring corridor of Austin, San Antonio, where I live. People have lights. There they are. What are these? Western North Dakota, please, no one lives there. You've got up north the Bakken Shale Field, in the middle the Permian Basin, and down south the Eagle Ford. Why are they lit up? It's flaring. It's all about transport. When you're dealing with oil and natural gas, as you guys know, oil's easier to move. It's a liquid. It won't go away on you. You can put it in a vat. You can put it in a trunk. You can put it into a rail car. You can gargle with... Well, don't gargle with it. That's disgusting. Any series of modes to move or even just store it temporarily. You can't do that with gas. Gas will disperse on you. You have to have a pressurized point of contained production, a pressurized uninterrupted transport system, and a pressurized contained point of consumption. If you don't have that whole chain, you do not have a natural gas industry. Now here in the United States, we've got the largest and most flexible natural gas transport network in the world, but we can't keep up. Natural gas is coming up, particularly from these three fields, not on purpose. It's a waste product, and so it is being flared. And while everybody is building the infrastructure as fast as they can to capture it, the fact remains that natural gas is so cheap that no one's producing it on purpose. Fully half of the natural gas that we used in the United States last year was sold at zero. It's free. The most versatile, flexible industrial commodity on planet Earth in the United States is free. Think about what that means. If you're producing it, it's a disaster. If you're consuming it, it's bloody brilliant. There are $900 billion of green and brownfield investment in transport and industrial production across the United States that has already been paid for, that will all be operational by 2020 to make use of the free natural gas. It is the biggest industrial build-out that we have seen in this country since 1943. And we were a little busy in 1943. The industry that's by far benefiting the most is electricity. The blue line shows you where electricity prices flatlined 7 years ago when the shale revolution started. Even in New York, the national average is blue, New York is in red. Even in New York, where there's a few wibbles along the way, it's pretty much stopped the upward march. The green line, that's Texas, where power prices have dropped by a quarter in the last 5 years. And that just leaves California, where, as you guys know, energy consumption is thoroughly encouraged, but energy production sometimes is flat out illegal. Say that joke in San Francisco and the room's quiet, so thank you. And this is the new norm. California is not the holdout, that's not fair. But California is the aberration, it's the anomaly of the American system. We'll talk about that more and more and more here in future slides, because the split is getting bigger. Shale's becoming more. With the price drop of the last year, instead of driving shale out of business,
So a lot of this is like shale back in like 2014, 2015. Old information. Let's see if we can find something that's still relevant. I mean, it's relevant, but it's like old relevant.
At energy independence, and the European recession is getting deeper and deeper. And so we're seeing,
It's still,
if you want to sell
it's still there.
anywhere, you have
6 years later.
to Asia. And so the Asian premium has now turned into a discount. Where's California? Well, it's a 7,000-mile sail from the Persian Gulf to Japan. It's a 10,000-mile to get to you. You're still paying a premium. Now, with oil at 45 to 50, you're not feeling it unless you're in production. But there's hope. In less than 5 years, probably something closer to 2, you're going to be seeing a breakdown in major production zones in at least 2 parts of the world. And they're the two parts that produce the most for export, the former Soviet Union and the Middle East. And when that happens, at the same time that the United States...
Jesus Christ, dude.
At the same time the United States becomes the only consuming power, and at the same time that the United States becomes formally and technically energy independent, well, let's just say that the math of transport changes considerably.
How did all this get tamed in 2020 for real, though?
14 million barrels of surplus crude that's sailing around Malacca and going up to Northeast Asia, there might be 5. You have to take your share out of that 5. And so the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Taiwanese, all of a sudden, you're not competing in this big bowl of crude, you're competing for a small little cup of it. Let me show you how that price is going to split. Well, actually, I've got one more thing to say on that slide. We're looking at a price split just around the corner between a North American system where prices are set by private companies that produce in small amounts over short-haul transport in a rule of law-based system, where prices will probably never breach 50. And then a global system where supply is disrupted, where the big state players are in play, and where the transport routes are measured in thousands of miles, where prices will probably never drop below 150 for the next 20 years.
Skip ahead a little bit.
Now the Iranians and the Saudis are starting to eye each other warily. The Saudis have been more aggressive in this.
Let's go back a little bit more.
Has always had a carrier battle group in the region specifically to keep the Saudis and the Iranians apart. The idea being that in any sort of free trade environment, which was core to our security throughout the Cold War, is you have to keep the energy flowing, otherwise there is no trade order. You'd have a global recession in a matter of days. Well, we don't care anymore. You may have noticed the aircraft carriers haven't been on station for half of this year. That's not the new normal. That's a transition to the new normal where they're not there at all. Now the Iranians and the Saudis are starting to eye each other warily. The Saudis have been more aggressive in this. They're actually pushing against the Iranians in 8 major military conflicts throughout the region. Syria, by the way, is what it looks like when the Saudis are winning. Ugly, but that's the Middle East. These two are opposed politically, economically, militarily, strategically, you name it. And because of the shale revolution, they are now transporting exactly the same product along exactly the same routes to exactly the same customers. This is going to break soon. And in particular, I want to point out a couple of areas. That's a really long-winded way of saying that this is basically just another great rivalry. So think of it as kind of like the Texas A&M UT rivalry, just with more guns. And like all great rivalries, eventually some fans end up at the wrong bar. And that's what these are. Up here in Iran at the UT Tower, they call it Khuzestan, you've got 3 million ethnic Arabs in a Persian state. The Arabs are seen as a dispossessed, troublemaking minority, and curfews are pretty normal. Khuzestan happens to be sitting atop 80% of Iran's oil production, and the Saudis have already targeted the Arabs of Khuzestan as a potential fifth column. Not to be outdone, down here in Kyle Field, the Saudis call it Gwar, also home to the Adcock oil processing facility in Ras Tanura, the world's largest offloading facility. You've got 3 million Saudi Shias in a Sunni country. The Iranians are already very active trying to penetrate that population. Just these 2 red arrows point directly at 11 million barrels per day of production and export infrastructure. That assumes that nobody else gets caught in the crosshairs. That assumes that the Kuwaitis or the Emiratis or the Qataris don't get involved at all. If a quarter of that comes offline, you have another $100 per barrel. Not to be outdone, you have East Asia. Now you'll notice on the left all those green bars and on the right all the red bars. The green bars are net oil exports, the red bars are net oil imports. They're a convenient 7,000 miles apart. And if we enter into a world where either Russian supplies or Middle Eastern supplies are compromised at all, there is not enough physical crude to supply everybody. So if you are in Korea or Japan or China or Taiwan, the only way that you can make sure that your needs are filled are to actually go to the Persian Gulf and get it. So we're going to have convoy systems again. Been a long time since that, huh? And as we all know, The Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, and Taiwanese have a centuries-long history of brotherly cooperation and love. There's no chance that anything will go wrong in that. Not only are those four countries going to have to pick sides in a Middle Eastern knife fight, should we have one tanker, just one, come under attack or confiscation by one of those...
That's what I'm waiting for.
That is the end of the global supply chain system. The supply chain system of the last 70 years has been built on the concept of cheap and safe maritime transport. So you take a supply chain and you break it up into pieces. You get the chairs from Malaysia, you get the engine block from China, you assemble it all in Mexico. You know, you break it up to whoever can do that step of the chain cheapest. You raise the marginal cost of transport by 1%, half of the world's supply chains are no longer viable. That alone is enough to shatter the Chinese system. There's another dozen reasons, but this isn't a China presentation. Which brings us back to you guys. We go back to this. Oh no, never mind. This is where I went. So, we're going to be in a world where if you take California plus the Northeast Asians, there's about 1/3 of the amount of crude that is actually necessary to keep everybody online. And you are at the very end of the world's largest supply run. 800,000 barrels per day is imported right now. By the end of next year, you will be the #1 oil importing state. By the end of 2017, you will import more crude than the rest of the 50 states put together.
I wonder if that's true now.
You're at the end of the global supply chain. So if anything goes wrong anywhere, you're the first one to lose access. So we will have $50 crude in Texas, and they will have $200 crude in Japan. And here, if it's under $250, I would be shocked. So, if you're a consumer, this is where you cry. If you're a producer... I believe it was Lorelei who said that Sacramento keeps coming up with crises and Kern County has to keep coming up with solutions. You will be called upon to triple oil production in less than 5 years. In yellow, these countries could make it, but it's going to require a very steady for the energy plays of the future, so you know who your competition is. Anyone who is blue can't mess this up from an energy production point of view. Anyone who's green, you could mess it up, but it really takes some forward thinking. A couple things I want to point out, like, for example, Saudi Arabia. They have to not fall in a war with Iran. That would really crimp their energy output. Or Brazil. Really, you just need to shoot everybody in Congress. I mean, you guys think Sacramento or Washington are bad. Wow, go to Brasilia. It's a nightmare. Countries in yellow. These countries could make it, but it's going to require a very steady hand and a lot of very forward-looking policies for them to kind of pull themselves out of the fire. And for countries in red, you are looking at a quintessential breakdown in the capacity of the countries to produce crude. So you're looking overall at probably a 30 to 40% reduction in what is freely available in global crude markets. The price increases from that are actually very good for you, but it's going to make for a very complicated supply picture for California. You just have to survive until you're there.
Let's see.
If you're in brown, you won't. And you just have to survive until the
all right, I think.
With that, let me leave this up. This is what I call the global stability map. Countries in blue are the ones that will rule the chaos to come. Countries in green, more or less the same situation they're in today. Yellow and brown are where things start to fall apart. If you are in yellow, you have something going for you. A unified population, self-sufficient in food, a strong ally, something that will let you meet the challenges of the new era ahead.
I guess that's yellow.
But you'll still be there. If you're in brown, you won't. And you're looking at state breakdown, particularly
state.
If you're in red, if you don't know a country that's in red, don't bother learning their names now because they won't be there in 5 years. All right, you guys have been great. I think you are the first audience I've had in 3 weeks that actually laughed at every single joke, and that means a lot to me, so thank you.
All right. Let's see if we can find something. So that's this 2019. There's 2021. Let's see. God, I'm trying to find the one where he talks about Russia. thought it was like a 2016 one. Jeez, look at how old this one is. Because he talked about Russia a little in this one. The climate change one was pretty interesting. We won't go into that one, but basically, where's this food? Security. Alright, there's a whole bunch of that. What is this, 1 year ago? Agricultural after globalization. Maybe this is something. Dairy West. There's food crisis. Disunited nation to trade breakdown. What was this, 2 years ago? His books are really good.
The front, the backyard. The medium blue, those are the new allies in this new global order, the first.
So it's basically an
global
update.
Order, the first era of international trade. Orange are the other guys. We don't like to talk about them in this country. And light blue is the field of competition. Everything mattered every day. The Americans could never deny battle. But then one idle Tuesday, in the very definition of pent-up demand, the Germans had a party and it was all over. And it had never occurred to the Americans that they might actually win. We were convinced that the only way that this could go down is with the end of the world.
Nuclear annihilation.
Well, we didn't think about the next day. And as a result, our view of the world almost overnight changed. And there's a lot of gray up there. A lot of places Americans just don't have a firm opinion. Now, the person who was in charge at the moment that the wall fell was George Herbert Walker Bush, who from a foreign policy point of view is arguably the best president that this country's ever had. He certainly had the expertise. Ran the CIA, vice president, served in the House of Representatives, ambassador to China, ran the Office of Budget. He was the right person in the right time with the right mindset and the right skill set, so of course we voted him out of office and we started down the parade of morons. Bill Clinton, smart dude, arguably the most intelligent president we've had since Jefferson, but he had a, how should we say this, an ADD issue. He also wasn't interested in foreign affairs. He saw himself as a domestic renewal leader. And so when he realized that he had a summit the following day, he would call up the CIA, he'd call up the State Department desk officers, and they'd come over to the White House and he'd kind of cram for the summit like he was back in college and preparing for a test. He was a millennial before his time, if you will. And he would hit it out of the park every time. He was just that good in small group settings. Relations would soar for a day because there was never any follow-up. And we had W, let's call it what it was. A monochromatic foreign policy that had one issue in one region and to hell with everything else. Obama comes in, and Obama had a very strange personality quirk for a world leader. He hates people. No American president went to Congress fewer times, met with his own cabinet secretaries fewer times, met with his own inner circle fewer times, met with his own party allies fewer times than Barack Obama. Well, that's not quite true. There's one exception. You guys remember William Harrison? He caught pneumonia during his inaugural speech and then died on day 30. Obama beats him.
But that's
nobody
it.
Else. So for the 24 years of these three administrations, we only had about 1 year of foreign policy. You guys remember the 1,000 points of light, the New World Order? That was George Herbert Walker Bush's attempt to get Americans to have a conversation with themselves about what sort of world they wanted to live in. And we punished him for it. And just as making a bad decision can have consequences for decades,
making no decision,
so can refusing to make a decision at all. The glory and the horror of Donald Trump is that at his core, he's got a really good point. The strategic order the Americans created to fight the Cold War no longer serves American strategic needs. It hasn't since the wall fell. But it was never supposed to serve American economic needs. America subsidizes the global system fights the Soviets. That was the deal. We never invested our economy in it. And as a percent of GDP, the United States remains
Look at
the
that.
least involved economy in the world. We are not a trading power. We never have been. So the Americans can walk away from the global system and be fine. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Slowly but
Raises
surely.
the question. If the Americans are going to drop the mantle of leadership, is there anyone out there who can step up and displace the Americans? Well, you need two things. First, you have to be able to provide global security on the ocean. About 85% of all international trade travels the ocean blue. It's got to be protected. Look at that. Now, on the right here, we have what's called a jump carrier. And on the left, we have what's called a supercarrier. On the deep blue sea, without any support from land-based assets, it takes 8 of those to fight off one of these. Now, there are 21 of these in the world. 11 of them are American flagged. There are 11 of these in the world. They are all American flagged. The combined navies of the rest of the planet have about 4% the long-range fire capacity of the American Navy today, and at current rates of global naval build-out, the combined navies of the rest of the world will roughly equal the United States in the year 2240. As an American, I don't lose a lot of sleep over this. By the way, the Chinese have 2 of these. One used to be a casino. The other one is a clone of the one that used to be a casino. Context. Second, consumption, because people have to buy this stuff, right? This is what we call a standard demographic pyramid. You've got children at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. This is what we call a consumption-led demographic.
What are you doing,
Because whenever
Cat?
you've got a big bulge in your population structure below roughly age 40, it's all about the spending. Raising kids, going to college, buying cars, buying houses, smoking pot, spend. Wow, we're in California. I figured that would work. Well,
All right, Cat. What are you doing? I already put you down once. What? You're supposed to be a tank. Oh, we're climbing over everything. Let's go. That's Mexico, Canada. There's Japan. Jesus Christ, dude. Let's go over here.
get an American economic policy. Now, if you can't get your birth rate back up, eventually you age into something like Japan. How do you run a first world economy without a workforce? You automate. We're the world leader in robotics because they have to be. Now, a funny thing about robots, they don't vote yet, so it doesn't matter where you put them. So Japan has become the world leader, not in outsourcing or in resourcing, but instead in something called de-sourcing. They've picked up huge chunks of their industrial plant, dropped it into other countries with better demographic structures so they can get closer to end markets and get on the safer side of currency risk and political risk and supply chain risk. Build where you sell. Toyota's 4 largest facilities in the world aren't anywhere near Japan. They're in Kentucky and Texas. Now here's the United States. We're kind of in the middle. We're kind of a chimney. There's 2 big groups we need to talk about. First, we've got the baby boomers. They are the largest generation as a percentage of the American population in this country's history. And they are all right on the verge of retirement.
They are.
That changes our capital structure. Think about how you've invested in your life. When you're 35, you put a small sliver of a small income away. Not a lot of capital there. But when you're 55, you put a big fat wedge of a much larger income. And when you're 64 3/4, you shove every possible dime you can into those retirement accounts. As you age, you provide more capital on easier terms to more borrowers. And as a country, we are on the very edge of the boomers' mass retirement. Capital has never been this cheap. It's never been this easy to get. This is the tech boom right here. But in 3 years, the majority of the American boomer class will have moved into retirement.
3 years. That's
Velocity
next
of
year.
capital won't stop. It'll reverse. The cost of capital will at least quadruple, which means the capital conditions that we've been used to for the last decade, almost over.
Now, he's talking about something that he expected to start happening next year, but because of COVID, it started happening last year, really at the end of 2020, but really last year. So, let's see more about the U.S. Everything should flip 35, 40, something like that.
The degree of capital collapse
So you can
is
see
just around the
it
corner
hasn't
is
changed
monumental.
in 5
As
years.
important as that is, what this means is the global order was going to end anyway, regardless of what the Americans did. Because consumption-led growth on this planet is about to become impossible. Quick walk around the world.
China. Jesus Christ, dude. They're
30
the
years after
worst.
the one-child policy, they've run out of 25-year-olds because that is how math works. South Korea aging even faster.
Sorry.
What about developing Asia? Here's Thailand, only marginally better.
Jesus
If
Christ.
there's one country that can't have an open, honest conversation about population policy, that would be Germany. And if there was one country that we were convinced, that we just knew in our bones, had cracked the code on how to have a lot of kids, that would be Italy. But apparently we were all wrong. Russia. Even if you believe Russian statistics, this is a terminal demography. They just made up 8 million children aged 10 and under in the last 18 months. Go fig. Oh, there we go. Brazil, country of the future. They're going to save us all, right? Yeah, look at the top left of that. This is Brazil 30 years ago. Here's Brazil today.
Jesus Christ,
They
Brazil. What are you
aging
doing?
6 times the American rate.
Because they're
They are
killing
becoming
themselves.
old long before they will become rich. And the average American will be younger than the average Brazilian by the year 2042. The average American became younger than the average American. I'm sorry, the average American became younger than the average Chinese 2 years ago.
Fucking crazy is that?
Folks, there's only 2 countries on this planet that have a sustainable demography outside of the United States. And while the French can handle the catering and the Kiwis can man the bar, a global order that does not make. This was all going to end anyway.
Yeah.
And if you remove the Americans from the equation, if you let the chips fall where they may, you get a series of brush fire wars as various countries, whether out of desperation or opportunity, feel compelled to take matters into their own hands. These are the zones that are likely to see the greatest exchanges of ammo. For those of you who know your history, you'll recognize that these are the parts of the world that historically have suffered the greatest conflicts. It's because it's where the world's geopolitical tectonic plates clash together. For those of you who know your economic history, you'll recognize these zones as the places that have seen the greatest economic growth over the last 70 years. That's because of the order, because the Americans forced everyone to be on the same side and outlawed war. It was base effect. And now it all goes into screaming reverse. The guy who is kind of midwifing this process is Robert Lighthizer. He's the U.S. trade representative. His job is to negotiate all the trade deals the U.S. has.
All right, so the trade deals that we have are all basically all done. Japan, South Korea, England, Mexico, Canada. So I'm trying to find where he starts talking about. Does he start talking about Germany in
For the
here?
summer, the Americans and the Canadians, in December. It's done. Trump actually signed it today. All right, we're somewhere warm, so there have got to be Canadians here. Where are you? Come on, show me my Canadians. All right, a bunch of you. Yeah, security in California sucks. This is Christina Freeland. She's the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister. She's the second most powerful person in the country. She used to be Foreign Minister. She got kicked upstairs with the last elections. Now, in my opinion, Minister Freeland is one of the 10 smartest people in Western civilization today. 4 years ago, I beat her in a debate. but we're not here to compare records. Freeland's biggest advantage, I think, is she knows how to keep her ego in check, which for a politician is kind of a big deal. Now, she became foreign minister the week that Donald Trump became president. And because she's the foreign minister of Canada, her first big meeting with a foreign leader was with Trump. And she realized not 5 minutes into that first encounter that she was absolutely the wrong person for the job. Everyone has their own personality quirks. Trump's biggest one is that he feels he must be the smartest person in any given room. And as long as Minister Freeland was in the same time zone, that was never going to happen. So she knew that she had to step back from managing day-to-day foreign affairs with the United States. She couldn't be the face of the relationship. She needed someone else to put in front, someone with a nice smile and a great head of hair and a tight outfit and a tighter body. Somebody who would just stand there and nod and smile, but somebody who was completely unburdened by having anything going on between their ears. And she found the perfect person.
Justin Trudeau
is by far Donald Trump's favorite world leader because he's not allowed to speak. He just stands there and nods and smiles, and Donald Trump's internal monologue fills in all the gaps, and it's very complimentary. The Canadians call it the hug offensive. You know, how Canadian is that? It was working great until a little over a year ago when the Canadians had the honor of hosting the G7 summit. And as host, Justin Trudeau had to speak, and for the first time in the Trump administration, the inner monologue did not match the sound waves. Relations literally collapsed in an hour. Now, when the Americans would go down to Mexico City for the trade talks for NAFTA 2, we'd talk about rules of origin, we would talk about the digital economy and agricultural subsidies. Wow. Real issues. But when Team Lighthizer would come up to Canada, they'd look at the agenda like, today we're talking about the worker rights of left-handed handicapped transvestites. What the fuck? The Canadians were stalling. Now, why would the Canadians think that stalling with this administration at this time in this political climate was even remotely a good idea? Well, to be blunt, it's because they had a really good read on how American-Canadian relations had been for the last 70 years. And it all has to do with this map. Canada is on the flight path for Soviet nuclear weapons on the way to the United States, which meant there was never any version of there's never any version of American security during the Cold War in which Canada was not protected for free. So the Canadians just had leverage like no one else in the world. Now, to their credit, they did not use this to free ride on security issues. They did the opposite. Whenever there was an international crisis, the Canadian Prime Minister was always the first world leader to pick up the phone, call the American president and say, we see what is happening, we are here, we are with you, how can we help? But Canadians are not stupid. They used that leverage, they just didn't use it in security. Because at the end of that phone call, once the details had worked out, the PM would slip in, oh yeah, and we'd love a little bit of extra market access for Quebecois Aerospace and Ontarian Automotive. On 70 different occasions, the Canadians carved exemptions out of American trade law. All of them were folded into NAFTA 1. But the Americans don't see the world this way anymore. None of those exemptions were folded into NAFTA 2. So when the Americans and the Mexicans reached their deal, they did something kind of fun. They didn't announce it right away. They waited until Freeland was on stage with them. That's the moment she found out. And shortly thereafter, Lighthizer said to her, look, we have a deal with the country of the future, it's not you. We have a deal with our future partner, and that's not you. You know our terms, you've known them since day one, they haven't changed. Take them or leave them, you've got 7 days. Only took 6.
It only took 6.
Shinzo Abe did everything right. He was the first world leader to congratulate Trump on the phone after his win. He was the second world leader to visit Trump in the White House. He brought a gift of golden golf clubs. He lost to Trump hideously in 18 holes. Here's a shot from the game. Egos were stroked, asses were kissed. They hit it off beautifully. And they hit a series of deals on intelligence sharing and military cooperation that were actually deeper than what the US and Japan had during the Cold War. That's a pretty high bar. So Abe goes home, like, okay, this guy's kind of, well, let's say rough around the edges, but I can manage it. The relation.
So, R.I.P. Abe. But basically, he thought he figured it out, but, he didn't. Because the U.S. doesn't really care about Southeast Asia as much as it used to. Like, it's an important point, but, like, we have been pulling out of the global order for the past, 30 years, 40 years. Basically my whole life. God, I'm 42. Basically my whole life. We've been slowly pulling out. Every now and then you have inflection points. Like the two wars in the Middle East, but generally speaking, we've been pulling out. Even at our highest deployed rate in the Middle East, I think we were still lower than we had used to be, like pre-80, where we were just deployed everywhere militarily. I don't think he talks about this. It's like one of his really old ones. He talks about this, so he's talking about Japan. The Germany one's pretty funny. All right.
One of them is far more excited about this deal than the other. We all complain about our jobs way too much. Let me start with the punchline here. The way decision making in the European Union works is that for any really big decision, like, say, divorce, each individual country has full veto rights. So freaking Malta, can veto anything. There was never any version of a divorce settlement that was going to involve Britain having access to the common market for any appreciable amount of time, because individual countries would veto it. This was always going to be a hard crash out. The Brits were always going to be on the outside. They were always going to have a depression, and they were always going to be looking at the United States as the only country that they might be able to link up with in order to stand. Now, the Brits have been here before. Back during World War I, Americans were kind of late to the party, and we forgot to build a navy first. Oops.
That's a good one. I must have missed the Germany one. He talks about China a little bit, goes into his book. They are pretty good jokes. This is probably his best one, I think. Because he goes into things that really matter, things that matter even today. Why our current technology doesn't work. This is something I think that if you're watching this, you should go and watch yourself. WM, I don't know why you call him that, but just the Sustainability Forum, Peter Zeihan, you find it pretty easily. And some of his newer stuff, I don't see the one, so I think it's this one right here where he talks about Russia more, but there's so many more of them I just don't want to go through. But in his books, he talks about it even more. And I think an hour, just short of an hour, is good enough. Just I was bored, so I figured I'd go look at some videos with you guys. That no one showed up, but that's fine. That's fine. I don't hate you guys for not showing up. Peace out, everybody. This was basically